Here at the European Parliament, the summer recess is about to begin. So it's time for us to look back at what's been another successful and eventful year for the EPP Group. When we brought you this review of the year 12 months ago, it was dominated by the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty. The story since then has been all about the implementation of that treaty and how it's changed the way the EU works. What we've seen over the past 12 months is a more powerful Parliament defending the interests of Europe's citizens and led by the EPP Group.
The foremost concern in the minds of most citizens is the aftermath of the financial and economic crisis. Europe's economy has slowly been returning to growth, although some member states are suffering the consequences of excessive budgetary deficits. The response from EU leaders has been to press for more supervision of the financial sector. The EPP Group was instrumental in creating several new structures to ensure greater oversight of the markets. This was all part of a wider push by member states for better and stronger economic governance of the EU in order to prevent a repeat of the debt problems we're now seeing in several countries. Alain Lamassoure, a French MEP from our group, is chairman of the Parliament's Budgets Committee.
Now we've reached a certain level of economic and monetary union, we have to prepare our national budgets together, the 27 budgets of the EU member states and the EU budget, which is effectively the 28th budget. The EU Commission has therefore proposed a procedure, a timetable, which will allow us to work together to coordinate our budgetary policies.
Throughout this year, the EPP Group has been firm in its conviction that the EU budget is a vital instrument for restoring growth, jobs and prosperity to Europe. When it came to negotiating the annual budget for 2011, our MEPs called for member states to contribute more resources. However, the member states wanted a far smaller rise in the budget than the Parliament had requested. The result, in the end, was a compromise, but it reflected the fact that MEPs were finally able to participate with the Council on an equal footing. This was the reaction back in December of Sidonia Jędrzejewska, Parliament's rapporteur on the 2011 budget.
The negotiations indeed were very, very difficult, complex and tough, but finally the outcome is good. The budget for the European Union for 2011 that we adopted in the Budgets Committee and that we are going to adopt now in the plenary session is the budget where all the priorities of the European Parliament are taken on board. So that is definitely surprisingly happy ending.
But more budgetary battles between the Parliament and the Council lie ahead. Already attention is turning to the next multi-annual financial framework, the 7-year medium-term EU budget that sets the Union's priorities. Some member states want to see a limit to the increase in that budget. Other member states want to see no real increase at all. But as the direct representatives of Europe's citizens, MEPs, especially those from our group, want to see member states match their rhetoric with their money.
There's very little disagreement between the institutions about the kinds of things the EU should be spending money on. But the EPP Group is convinced that if the EU budget is really going to add value to the lives of European citizens, it needs to be expanded.
It's not possible to make more Europe and to meet Lisbon Treaty priorities and E2020 without a fair amount of money, and we calculated this money on the 5% of the increase, and it's not only a technical proposal but a political one. Therefore I expect the Commission and the Council to get the message and undertake a fruitful negotiation with the Parliament.
One of the reasons why the EU will need more money in the next budget cycle is because the Union is still expanding. The recent arrest of Bosnian Serb war crimes suspect Ratko Mladic has given a significant boost to Serbia's hopes of becoming an EU member state. But the country most likely to become the 28th member of the Union is Croatia, which earlier this year received the green light from the European Commission. For Croatia's Prime Minister Jadranka Kosor, a member of our EPP political family, her country's progress towards EU membership is a cause for celebration.
This is a hard road, a lot of work, a lot of changes, a lot of reforms. I also could say that we had to abandon previous behaviours, but at the end, this is a road which is worth taking.
But the EU's attention is focused not only on prospective members. Since the start of the year, the Middle East and North Africa have experienced unprecedented political turmoil. In Egypt and Tunisia, long-serving autocrats were chased out of office by popular uprisings. In Libya, Colonel Gaddafi's regime is desperately trying to cling to power, while in Syria, anti-government protesters have been massacred.
Suddenly, the EU has been faced with a completely unexpected political emergency on its doorstep. The Union's blueprint for relations with nearby countries, known as the European neighbourhood policy, has had to be rapidly reassessed in the light of events. This too has budgetary consequences. The EU needs to invest in these countries to stabilise them politically and promote economic development. Mario David, an EPP member from Portugal, is chairman of Parliament's delegation to the countries of the Mashrek region.
We are going to treat from now on differently those which are democracies than those which are not. We are not imposing anything. It must be a win-win situation. But what has to come extremely clear out of this new neighbourhood policy is that we are going to be much more open. We are going to contribute much more with the new democracies than with those that keep on different systems of governance.
One of the consequences of the unrest in the Mediterranean region has been a dramatic increase in the number of migrants trying to flee across the sea to Europe. In response, France and Italy suggested that the Schengen Agreement, which abolishes checks at the EU's internal borders, could be scrapped. They were concerned that the EU's freedom of movement principle was making it impossible for them to monitor and manage migratory flows. But for the EPP Group, there was no question of dispensing with Schengen, which remains one of the EU's fundamental and most successful policies. Simon Busuttil from Malta is our group's spokesman on justice and home affairs.
Now, if certain individual member states have difficulties at their external borders or at their internal borders between one member state and the other, we are willing to discuss that. But the re-erection of national borders within Schengen must only be exceptional in nature.
The EPP Group is proud of its role as the citizens' champion, and this year has seen a number of successes in that respect. Perhaps the most important has been legislation to clarify the rights of hospital patients who want to travel to another EU member state for treatment when they face an undue delay in their own country.
Several years ago, the European Court of Justice established patient mobility as a right of EU citizens. Since then, the European Commission and the Parliament have been discussing legislation to clarify the extent of citizens' rights. In the past 12 months, there was a breakthrough thanks to the determination of Parliament's rapporteur, French EPP member Françoise Grossetête. As she explained to EPP TV back in January when the legislation was adopted, citizens will benefit substantially from increased opportunities for patient mobility.
Finally, we are clearly defining the right of patients to access cross-border healthcare, which means having the best possible information on the treatment they can access in a member state other than their own. And that's really important because we've seen a certain number of cases going before the Court of Justice, and it was the court that was making the law. So the time came when the Parliament, as a legislative body, had to seize the opportunity, and that's what we've accomplished today.
Où le Parlement, qui est législateur, devait se saisir de cette législation, et c'est ce que nous faisons aujourd'hui.
A major package of consumer rights legislation was also adopted by the Parliament recently. The purpose of this legislation is to iron out some of the differences between member states and create harmonised standards in line with the EU's single market. More and more of us are buying things online across borders. One of the key provisions of this legislation is to enable consumers to withdraw from purchases up to 14 days after they receive goods or begin receiving a certain service. Andreas Schwab, an EPP member from Germany, guided this dossier through the Parliament.
We need a common set of rules to cope with the challenges that are ahead of us. And for consumers, it's very difficult to see how to buy and shop online if they know that the rules from one country to another in Europe are diverging. Therefore, it's in the interest of all citizens of the European Union to have a common set of rules.
And in another boost for consumers, MEPs endorsed new measures with regard to the labelling of food, so that we know more about the geographical origin of what we eat and the information provided is easier to understand. German EPP member Renate Sommer was the Parliament's rapporteur for this dossier, and she told us about MEPs' decision on labelling meat slaughtered according to religious rituals.
Two-thirds majority voted in favour of a special labelling from meat from slaughter without stunning. From my point of view and for the Parliament, it has not really something to do with the religions. For Parliament, it is a problem of animal welfare. But meanwhile, I think it would be better to handle this point extra in an extra regulation, possibly with the headline animal welfare.
So it's been another successful year for the EPP Group, which has strengthened its position as Europe's leading political force. We hope you've enjoyed the stories we've brought you from here at the European Parliament about the work our MEPs are doing to protect and promote your interests in Europe. For more information about our group's activities, please visit our website, eppgroup.eu. We'll be back after the summer when Parliament resumes activity. But for now, thanks for watching and see you again soon.